An energy security crisis looms for the Philippines as the Malampaya gas field nears depletion, and Rectobank, SC-72, emerges as the epicenter of confrontation with China. China's CNOOC has expanded its operations inside the Philippine EEZ, escorted by Coast Guard and militia vessels that blur the line between commerce and coercion.
On whether there can be joint development with China on our exclusive economic zone, my opinion is it's not possible because under the Constitution, there's a provision there which says that the use and enjoyment of the exclusive economic zone shall be reserved exclusively to Filipinos.
Beijing justifies its presence through the 9-dash line, claiming historic rights rejected by international law but driven by energy needs, military ambitions, and sovereignty narratives. The South China Sea's oil wealth is immense, with billions of barrels of oil and trillions of cubic feet of gas, alongside fisheries and minerals vital for food and industry. For the Philippines and other littoral states, this is both an opportunity and a trap. Energy security versus the risks of Chinese retaliation. Yet China's white hole strategy and economic deterrence have kept exploration stalled, leaving SC-72 blocked by constant Chinese interference.
I also say this as a Chinese national. I can bring you to court whether you agree it or not. But I will never be able to drag you into arbitration without your consent, because arbitration without consent is a violation of rule of law.
The 2016 PCA ruling confirmed the Philippines' sovereign rights, but Beijing's rejection and escalating offshore expansion show its intent to turn law into irrelevance. Control of the South China Sea is thus about more than energy. It is about power projection, A2, AD strategy, and dominance over global sea lanes. For smaller states, the future holds a dual challenge of resource need and geopolitical risk, often under pressure to accept China's joint development trap. Ultimately, the fight for Rectobank and surrounding waters is not merely about oil. It is the frontline test of whether UNCLOS and the rules-based order will hold, or whether coercion and resource extraction will redraw sovereignty in the Indo-Pacific. The most immediate and volatile theater of China's offshore ambitions in Philippine waters is Rectobank, Reed Bank, officially designated as Service Contract 72, SC-72. Situated roughly 80 nautical miles west of Palawan, Rectobank is well within the Philippines' 200 nautical mile exclusive economic zone, EEZ, under UNCLOS, and its hydrocarbon reserves are widely viewed as the country's best prospect to replace the Malampaya gas field once it runs dry. Yet despite its legal clarity, Manila's attempts to exercise its sovereign rights over the area have been met with persistent and systematic pressure from Chinese Coast Guard, CCG, and maritime militia vessels, which routinely escort or shadow Chinese-linked survey ships and obstruct Philippine exploration activities. This constant presence turns what should be a purely commercial energy issue into a flashpoint of sovereignty and security. At the center of this dispute is the China National Offshore Oil Corporation, Beijing's flagship state-owned oil company. While ostensibly a corporate actor, CNOOC is deeply embedded in the Chinese party-state system, functioning as an instrument of foreign policy rather than a neutral commercial entity. Its exploration and survey ships do not operate independently. Instead, they are consistently accompanied and protected by paramilitary escorts from the CCG and the Chinese maritime militia. This corporate state nexus blurs the line between commercial energy development and military strategy. Beijing to frame incursions as business ventures while simultaneously projecting hard power in contested waters. Concrete examples illustrate this carrot-and-stick approach. In August 2023, Philippine authorities reported that CCG vessels blocked and shadowed Philippine-chartered survey ships conducting seismic studies near Rectobank, effectively stalling Manila's efforts to move SC-72 toward production. Around the same time, Philippine supply missions to Ayungin Shoal, Second Thomas Shoal, just south of Rectobank, were harassed by aggressive Chinese maneuvers, including blocking runs and close-in shadowing that created a climate of intimidation. These incidents highlight Beijing's dual-track strategy, offering the carrot of potential joint development with CNOOC while wielding the stick of harassment and obstruction against unilateral Philippine activity. The message is unmistakable. Resource extraction in the Philippine EEZ will proceed only on terms dictated by Beijing, with CNOOC as the commercial spearhead and the CCG as the armed enforcer. At the core of Beijing's South China Sea (SCS) strategy lies the 9-dash line, a sweeping demarcation that claims nearly 90% of the waters as China's own. Despite being legally invalidated by the 2016 Permanent Court of Arbitration ruling, Beijing continues to assert that its position rests on indisputable historical facts and historic rights dating back centuries. This claim, rejected under modern international law, provides the ideological and legal scaffolding for China's assertive presence, enabling it to frame activities such as Coast Guard patrols, artificial island construction, and resource exploration as sovereign defense rather than expansionism. Beyond historical narrative, energy security is a powerful driver. As the world's largest oil importer, China faces acute strategic vulnerabilities in its dependence on distant sea lanes, particularly through the Strait of Malacca, often referred to as the Malacca Dilemma. The SCS, by contrast, offers significant untapped offshore energy reserves close to home. China's own state-owned CNOOC plays a central role. In 2022, it derived 43% of its crude oil output from domestic offshore operations, much of it concentrated in the SCS. Securing access to these hydrocarbons not only diversifies China's energy portfolio, but also reduces its reliance on vulnerable choke points controlled by foreign navies. Equally important is the military dimension. By maintaining a constant presence in disputed waters, Beijing creates a de facto control zone that extends well into the EEZs of Southeast Asian neighbors. Its extensive program of artificial island building and militarization, notably at Fiery Cross Reef, Mischief Reef, and Subi Reef, has transformed reefs into fortified bases equipped with runways, missile systems, and surveillance infrastructure. These outposts serve as forward operating platforms for the People's Liberation Army Navy, PLAN, the China Coast Guard, CCG, and the Maritime Militia, allowing Beijing to project power deep into the SCS. In effect, China has created a network of strategic bastions from which it can both safeguard its resource interests and deter foreign naval activity, reinforcing its sovereignty claims through constant on-the-water enforcement. The South China Sea, SCS, is not only one of the busiest maritime trade routes in the world, but also one of its most resource-rich regions. According to estimates by the U.S. Energy Information Administration, EIA, and the Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS, the SCS contains around 11 billion barrels of oil and 190 trillion cubic feet, TCF, of natural gas in proved and probable reserves. While these figures are contested and actual extraction potential varies by location, they underscore the immense strategic and economic stakes tied to control of the seabed. Whoever dominates access to these reserves gains not only domestic energy security, but also leverage over regional energy markets. For the Philippines, these resources are existential. The Recto Bank, Reed Bank, lying within its exclusive economic zone, EEZ, is estimated to hold up to 3.4 TCF of natural gas and 440 million barrels of oil. These reserves represent the country's most promising replacement for the Malampaya gas field, which currently supplies about 20% of the Philippines' electricity, but is projected to run dry by 2027. Developing Recto Bank is therefore a strategic imperative for Manila, not only to keep the lights on, but also to reduce dependence on imported fossil fuels and stabilize its fragile energy sector. Chinese interference here, through CNOOC-backed surveys and Coast Guard harassment, directly threatens the Philippines' energy future. Beyond hydrocarbons, the SCS is a hub of non-hydrocarbon wealth, particularly in fisheries. The region accounts for nearly 12% of the world's total fish catch, sustaining tens of millions of livelihoods across Southeast Asia. For countries like the Philippines and Vietnam, control over these fishing grounds is as much about food security as it is about sovereignty. Moreover, the seabed holds deposits of deep-sea minerals, such as polymetallic nodules and rare earth elements, resources that are increasingly vital for the global energy transition and high-tech industries. The convergence of oil, gas, fish, and minerals makes the SCS not just a maritime frontier, but a resource nexus of global consequence, where competition over wealth and security is inseparable. Among the littoral states of the South China Sea, the Philippines stands at the sharpest crossroads. With the Malampaya gas field set for depletion by 2027, failure to bring Rectobank, Reedbank SC-72, into production will leave Manila dangerously exposed. The fallback option is an accelerated shift to imported liquefied natural gas, LNG. But this comes at a steep price. Analysts warn that such dependence could drive power costs up by as much as 50%, straining households and industries already facing energy insecurity. For the Philippines, then, the ability to secure exploration rights in its EEZ is not merely about sovereignty, it is about economic survival and national energy security. Vietnam provides a telling case study of resistance and vulnerability in the face of China's offshore assertiveness. Hanoi has long contested Chinese activities around Vanguard Bank and has moved forward with projects like the Blue Whale gas field, its largest energy development to date. Yet when CNOOC has pushed aggressively into contested zones, Vietnam has sometimes been forced to suspend or retract exploration efforts under intense diplomatic and economic pressure from Beijing. This dynamic illustrates the stick side of China's policy, a combination of paramilitary intimidation at sea and political leverage onshore, designed to compel smaller states to defer to Beijing's terms or accept joint development under Chinese control. Other claimants adopt varied strategies shaped by their own circumstances. Malaysia continues to pursue offshore drilling, often through joint ventures in less contested areas, avoiding direct confrontation while still asserting its rights. Brunei, by contrast, remains the quietest claimant, generally prioritizing its economic relationship with China over public opposition, though its EEZ overlaps remain unresolved. Taiwan, excluded from ASEAN processes, retains control over Itu Aba, Taiping Island, the largest natural feature in the Spratlys, which it uses as a logistical hub for both civilian and paramilitary operations. These diverse approaches reveal a common thread. While all littoral states seek to secure their maritime entitlements, China's economic weight and coercive capacity force them to balance sovereignty claims against the risks of escalation. China's resource strategy in the South China Sea relies heavily on gray zone coercion, embodied in the so-called white hole strategy. Instead of deploying its navy outright, Beijing projects power through the China Coast Guard, CCG, and maritime militia vessels, often disguised as civilian fishing boats. This allows China to maintain a persistent and intimidating presence in contested waters, while avoiding the direct military escalation that the use of naval warships would trigger. The result is a climate of constant, low-level tension in which Chinese vessels outnumber, outmuscle, and outlast their Southeast Asian counterparts, establishing effective control without open conflict. A second instrument of coercion is economic deterrence targeted at foreign energy companies. International firms contracted by Manila to develop Service Contract 72, SC-72, such as Forum Energy, have been met with explicit Chinese threats of sanctions, harassment, or interference at sea. These warnings have proven effective. Many foreign partners, wary of jeopardizing their access to the Chinese market or risking confrontation, have withdrawn or suspended operations. This tactic deprives the Philippines of the foreign investment, advanced drilling technology, and deep water expertise needed to bring Reedbank's resources online, tightening Beijing's grip on Manila's energy future. At the core of this struggle lies the Malampaya replacement dilemma. With Malampaya nearing depletion, SC-72 at Rectobank represents the Philippines' best hope for new domestic energy production. Yet, despite its legal entitlement under UNCLOS and the 2016 arbitral ruling, the Philippines license holder remains unable to proceed. The reason is stark. Chinese government vessels maintain a continuous, obstructive presence within the contract area, blocking survey work and intimidating support ships. This deliberate interference directly undermines the Philippines' sovereign rights to explore and exploit its EEZ resources, highlighting how China uses a blend of paramilitary power and economic pressure to turn international law into an abstraction while reshaping realities at sea. The battle over hydrocarbon resources in the South China Sea is inseparable from the 2016 Permanent Court of Arbitration, PCA, ruling.
The new government here in Manila is grappling with what might be called catastrophic success. What comes next is obviously going to be a delicate balancing act. It is a time for cool heads, and Manila is sensibly, I think, being careful not to flaunt its legal victory. It's very important at this stage not to do anything that could give China a pretext for escalation.
On July 12, 2016, the tribunal ruled overwhelmingly in favor of the Philippines, finding that China's claims to historic rights within the 9-dash line had no legal basis under UNCLOS. Crucially, the PCA explicitly determined that Mischief Reef, Second Thomas Shoal, and Recto Bank, Reed Bank, were submerged features within the Philippines' EEZ and continental shelf, giving Manila sole entitlement to explore and exploit resources there. Yet China rejected the award outright, dismissing it as null and void and without binding force. This outright rejection highlights Beijing's core strategy: prioritize unilateral national claims and on-water enforcement over adherence to international legal norms, even as it remains a signatory to UNCLOS. China's aggressive expansion of offshore exploration in the SCS is driven by a convergence of strategic necessity and opportunity. First, its domestic reserves are depleting. As the world's largest oil importer, China consumed over 12.8 million barrels per day in 2018, with demand only rising since. This dependency has created a profound sense of vulnerability and a pressing need to secure nearby energy supplies. Second, Beijing has exploited the post-pandemic geopolitical vacuum. As Southeast Asian states prioritize economic recovery, and the international spotlight shifts toward crises like the war in Ukraine and Middle East instability, China has pushed harder to entrench itself in contested waters. Finally, advances in deep-sea drilling technology have empowered the China National Offshore Oil Corporation to operate in previously inaccessible basins. For Southeast Asian littoral states, the future is defined by a dual challenge: balancing the urgent need to tap offshore resources against the risk of Chinese retaliation and coercion. Vietnam's clashes over Vanguard Bank, Malaysia's cautious joint ventures, and the Philippines' stalled SC-72 all illustrate this dilemma. Beijing often promotes joint development agreements as a solution, but these arrangements typically require claimant states to set aside the PCA ruling or implicitly concede Chinese claims. Such deals amount to a joint development trap, offering short-term energy gains while eroding long-term sovereign rights. Against this backdrop, many littoral states increasingly depend on external powers. The United States, through its freedom of navigation operations and its alliance commitments, e.g., the 1951 U.S.-Philippines Mutual Defense Treaty, provides a crucial deterrence shield. Yet sustaining this balance requires constant engagement from Washington and its partners. Absent such backing, Southeast Asian states risk being isolated and pressured into compliance with Beijing's terms. At its core, the CNOOC presence in the Philippine EEZ is not a simple matter of commercial exploration, but the front line of a grand strategy to transform the legally invalid 9-dash line into a practical maritime boundary enforced by power. This conflict embodies the tension between international law and coercive state practice. The world faces a stark choice: to uphold the rules-based order anchored in UNCLOS and the PCA ruling, or to allow a state-owned enterprise, backed by military force, to redefine sovereignty unilaterally through coercion and resource extraction. The stakes are enormous, not only for the Philippines and its energy security, but for the credibility of international law itself. Ultimately, the fate of RectoBank will serve as the clearest barometer of the international community's resolve and the future balance of power in the Indo-Pacific. If you liked the video, do not forget to like, share, and subscribe our channel for deep analysis of contemporary issues.